You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
David, we're talking about a fairly important topic, not that we talk about the unimportant ones here.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. We're talking about yet another very important topic.
Yeah, I put it out to some folks in our Slack workspace for clients and said, hey, David and I are recording. What do you want us to talk about? And we got a whole bunch of great suggestions, but somebody, and I forget who, I apologize, they said profit bands. And we've reinterpreted that to performance bands, and I think you'll talk about why. And so the idea is we all, as human beings and as business owners, we all get stuck at various places on our journey as we grow, whatever growth means. And the profitability of the business is one of those areas where we seem to, no matter where we are, we seem to feel like we're in this very narrow window where we can't get much higher and hopefully we can't get much lower.
Yeah.
But we tend to get stuck there. And as we move through them slowly, if we are able to move them, we take with ourselves these ideas of limitations, I think. So you've seen into well over 1,000 firms. You've seen huge variability in profitability. How do you want to start? Do you want to start by talking about the bands or a little bit about the issue itself?
Maybe kind of the issue itself. I don't hear many people describe their firm using the terminology that we use. They usually think about top-line revenue or number of people or profitability. And profitability is sort of I guess that'd be the main alternative way to look at this than the way we're looking at it. But the problem with profitability is that it kind of sends the wrong signal to employees because they think, oh, that's your money. Like, why do I care about that? Plus, it's so heavily impacted by how much the principal, or if there's multiple principals, pay themselves. And so it's kind of artificial. You can't really compare one firm to the next. So something that you and I both use a lot is just this performance band. So you just add up all the people, add up all the fee after cost of goods sold, and divide one into the other, and then you have some sense of where a firm is. And we're talking in U.S. dollars today, even though you and I have clients all over the world, and it would need to be adjusted for some other places. But it's just a kind of an easy way to look at it, because otherwise you have this, like, how are you going to make more money at a firm? Well, I just need to work longer. And that's sort of, well, what if you change the performance band? So you look at that, and then you sort of look behind the curtain and say, why do some firms sit in one performance band and not another? In some cases, it's because they're just starting out and now they're figuring some things out and they go up to the next higher one. But there's some other factors in here too. So when you suggested this topic, I was like, yes, let's talk about that. This is pretty interesting. And we've come up with 4 of them, right? At some point, we'll have to tell people what they are.
Why don't we start there? What are the 4 bands as you see them?
Yeah, it's a little bit artificial in the sense that there's not some scientific study that says this is where the boundary should be, but this just comes from looking inside so many firms, you and I both doing that together. And the lowest one is 100 to 150,000 per person. So if you've got a 10-person firm, the billings would be between $1 million and $1.5 million. That's 100 to 150,000 per full-time equivalent employee. And we're just labeling that sort of developing. This is a place where a lot of firms start and many of them move beyond it. Some of them don't. So that's the first one, 100 to 150 developing.
Can I just interject something there? So what if I own a small firm or even a larger firm, and I've just heard that number, the lowest band is $100 to $150,000 in AGI per FTE. So agency gross, like gross fees per full-time equivalent employee. I've just heard that. I've done the math and I've gone, I'm at 70,000. I'm below. What does that mean about me and my business?
Well, we're going to get into those factors, but I would not be discouraged. I would say, oh, wow, there's a ceiling above me. But I didn't realize, probably the first thing you're going to think when you hear something like that is, wow, I didn't know where I stood compared to other firms, right?
Yeah, and it all is not lost, but you are even below developing. There is hope.
Yeah.
I wonder if some of those businesses aren't like part-time business. It's a sideline or it's like...
Right.
Yeah, okay.
That's why we say full-time equivalent, because if it's half-time, then obviously that wouldn't count. Yeah. So that's the first one.
Okay, so band number 1, we're calling it developing, and it's $100,000 to $150,000 in fees per full-time equivalent employee.
Yeah.
What's after that?
Second one, right above that, is what I would call typical or classic. This is where most firms are, and this is somewhere in the 150 to 180 range. In fact, right in that middle 155 to 160 is where a huge chunk of firms sit. They're there. It took them a year to get there, and they stay there, and it's going to be that way for a long time. And our message to those folks is there's a couple layers above, and here's some things you could do to get there. So, yeah, 150 to 180. I call that typical or classic. Third level is solid. That's 180 to 220. This is where you could be talking with another peer, and many of them would be impressed. They think, oh, there's probably some things I could learn from you. This is good. This is above where I am. I kind of see how to get there, but I'm not exactly sure what all those things are, but this is solid performance, and I'm just calling it solid, 180 to 220. Then above that would be 220 or above, and I'm just calling that exceptional. There just aren't that many firms that get above that, but the ones that do are doing some pretty unique things. This is not about working harder. We should make that clear, right? We're just assuming a normal work week, but a firm that's above 220 regularly is doing something unique that most other firms aren't doing.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. Okay, so you've got a list of critical factors that impact why you might be stuck at a certain band. And maybe we'll go through the factors and talk about them and weigh them. And then at some point we'll come back and talk about, do certain factors, are they more relevant at certain bands than others?
Right. And you and I worked on this list together, and they resonate to both of us. You and I are seeing inside, actually we're seeing inside some of the same firms if we happen to share them as a client, but mainly we're seeing inside of different firms and comparing notes. And so we're saying, all right, what are the things that are different? What moves people from one to the other? And should we just start?
Yeah, so of the 11 on the list, we'll start with the biggest one.
Maybe we won't even get to the rest of them. Just be the first one.
Yeah, before you name it, I want to ask you, how much weight of all the 11, how much weight do you assign to this one? How critical a factor is it in the profitability or the performance of the firm?
It is so clearly more important than any other one. I don't know how to rate it, but I would say maybe this one is a third of all of it, maybe even more. I don't know. Well, how would you answer that?
Yeah, you wouldn't have surprised me if you'd gone to as high as 50%.
Right.
So let's say it's like 25 to 50% of all of the reasons why you're stuck in this band is this one critical factor. And we'll pause here while people try to guess what that is.
And now we have a technical problem, and Two Bobs is off the air, and for some reason we never get back to it.
All right, what is it?
I leave people hanging. It's this innate confidence.
Did you say competence or confidence?
Confidence.
Confidence.
Yeah.
I know
competence doesn't have a lot to do with how much money you make.
Say that again.
Competence has very little to do with how much money you make.
The show's over, folks. Drop the mic.
Yeah.
There's some connection to competence, but confidence is more important than competence. Confidence is more important than anything else when it comes to the financial performance of your firm.
It is. It is. You remember that really strange phone call I made to you in a snowstorm?
Yeah.
I was driving.
You were driving through Nebraska.
Yeah. And it was late at night, some godforsaken place, going to some other godforsaken place.
Nebraska.
Well, it was a town. It wasn't the whole state that was godforsaken. And I remember it hit me so hard, like I'd never seen this before. It was this whole issue of confidence. I realized that I believed in my clients, in many cases, more than they believed in themselves, but it didn't matter because I could express that. But if they didn't already have that belief, then whatever I said didn't, they liked it. It felt good to them, but it didn't really move the needle. And there's something about this innate confidence. And if you've got multiple principals in a firm, they don't all have to have it. At least just one of them has to have it.
Yeah.
And that comes from what? From your mom? From where does it come from?
Yeah, you're born with it, so it's either innate. And then the reason you called me in the snowstorm is you came up with this theory or hypothesis that you said, where does confidence come from? It's a question I had considered before, not very deeply. So my answer was, you take something you're good at and you draw strength from it. And you said, no, that's bullshit. Confidence comes from two places. Number one, options. You have options. So if this one doesn't work out, that's fine.
Right.
And then number two, deeply held beliefs.
Yeah.
And I said, Yeah, I'll think about it and I'll get back to you and tell you how you're wrong.
That's the way you usually respond to my ideas.
Roughly a year later, I said, you remember that phone call in the snowstorm? I've been thinking about it. You're right. I can improve on it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's marketplace acceptance. So I could tell a client they're really good. They should be charging more than they are. They don't necessarily believe it. They like hearing it. But until their prospects tell them, until they have people lined up, 2 people lined up for 1 slot on their roster, that's when they start to believe it. And that impacts how they think and how they price and all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, we should leave price later, but
Marketplace acceptance shows up in options.
right.
Options are money in the bank, opportunity pipeline, full client roster, et cetera.
Right.
And then there's the part that you're just born with, right? You're just born with it.
And it's often unfounded. It's like parents believe in their kids when there's no evidence to support the belief.
Yeah. And I've said this before, but a biologist friend of mine says, if you're male, you wake up in the morning with this advantage. It's called testosterone. So you look in the mirror and you're this horrible, overweight, disheveled, ugly looking thing. And you look in the mirror and think, I am fantastic. And it's purely chemical. It's testosterone. So there's that. So number 1 is confidence. And what can you do? And we're going to come back to this one, I think, because it begs the question. We've talked about this before, but it begs the question, like, how do you increase your confidence? And the answer is it's really hard to do that. So much of it is just innate. Okay, but let's cover the other things on the list because there's some really meaty ones here as well. What's number 2?
Yeah, the second one is that at least one of the partners has worked at another firm, I guess we could say, that had confidence. So they're just used to saying, no, we don't do that. We can do that, but that's probably going to be $400,000, and somebody who doesn't have confidence is sort of choking as they hear that. There's just something about having worked at another firm that regularly charged a lot of money that gives them the confidence to just do the same thing. So prior experience, I do see this missing. So if somebody doesn't have any experience in the field and they start a firm, they may pick up the confidence by somebody they hire who has that experience. But if they haven't been in the field and know what other people charge, sometimes it's hard for them to move to a higher band. That's the second point.
I can imagine somebody starting a firm, they have no knowledge of what people in this space charge. So they pick a range and it ends up being way higher than the average competitor. And they're just oblivious to it. And I remember having some conversations with principals about that. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I just started doing it this way and charging this much money. I had no idea we were 3 times as much as anybody else. Clients just paid it.
Yeah.
So there is that. Your previous experience has a big impact, or your senior people's previous experience at other firms has a big impact on like what you think in your mind is that right band. And it can cut either way.
Right.
Number 3 on the list of critical factors that affect your performance band.
You're really good at sales.
Yeah.
There are a lot of firms that are doing really great work, but they're not great at sales. And so they don't have these options. I know there's a lot of overlap in all these reasons, but they don't have these options. And so they don't feel like they can press the envelope and it's just really great at sales. In fact, I don't see this as much now. I used to see it in the past where you would have this whole percentage of the marketplace where the whole firm was driven by sales. I mean, after they closed a deal, they were kind of bored with it already. Like doing the work was not what drove them. And then you'd have other firms that hated sales and they just loved drawing things out and doing fantastic deep work. But the people that were drawn by sales, they made mistakes left and right, but they could always cover them up because they could always find a new client.
Yeah, and if that sales strength resides with the principal, it can have an oversized effect.
Right.
If it resides with an individual and that individual leaves, and I've seen this happen multiple times, I'm like names of firms are coming to mind. They think we're a really good firm, we're really good at the business part of the business. Then that one person leaves and it's like, we can't sell anything. Why is this so hard?
Yeah, right.
And so I'll go on a limb here and say that the firms that outsource selling because they don't want to develop the skill in-house, they're really likely to be stuck at one of these lower performance bands.
That has not occurred to me, but now that I'm just mentally checking that against the firms I know that are using outsourced selling, I think you're exactly right. Yeah. In fact, they're not even that excited about the outsourced selling. They feel like they've got to do it right. And that's a great point.
It's like, we need somebody to clean this sewer.
Right.
We don't want to do that ourselves. Let's go get somebody else to do that.
The fourth one is something you've got to talk about. And to whatever extent you can, Can you draw some connection between people that understand pricing and where you find them in the bands, the role that plays in moving them to a higher band? I mean, you've thought about pricing and value pricing, particularly for many, many years, but you've been on a mission the last few years to really infuse firms with a new understanding about how this works.
Yeah, so number 4 on the list is value-based pricing. And to me, that's really probably the most critical factor that separates the last people from the last 2 bands. Solid, so in that 180 to 220 in revenue per full-time equivalent employee, to above 220. There seems to be a ceiling for almost all firms, somewhere around that 220, 240 mark, whatever it is.
Because there's only so many hours in a week.
Yeah.
And there's a certain acceptable hourly range, and it's like you're tied to that.
So you see this normal distribution of firms across these 3 bands, and then you see way out on the right, these firms that are in like 350, 400, 450. And people listening to that are thinking, well, there's no way firms like ours are charging $450,000 in fees per full-time equivalent employee. There are, but those firms are almost universally pricing based on value. So they've let go of time and materials. Most of them have let go of tracking time, although not all of them.
Right.
And so that's really what gets people to the final band. My theory is, and I haven't thought about it too deeply, I certainly don't have like data that I've measured on this, but my theory is you could go from band number 2, typical / classic, from 150 to 180, and just shoot right through solid, just leap right over solid up into exceptional through understanding and embracing value-based pricing.
I agree. I don't know anything else you could do that would change the band you're in as quickly as understanding pricing differently.
Yeah, you can't change your confidence quickly.
Right.
We were saying we would weight that the highest and the most important. But the one, number 2, and certainly the one that you can impact easily is moving to pricing based on the value that you create rather than the cost of your inputs or the market value, in air quotes, of your outputs.
Yeah.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
Okay, and number 5, 1 or more pre-qualified referral sources. Oh, yeah. Okay.
You know, like somebody that's shoveling opportunity your way. And before you figure that out, you're really impressed with this firm. And it's like, wow, this performance is fantastic. This is great. And then you start asking questions about where they get their work from. And it turns out there's this one person who keeps sending them their very best clients, right?
Yeah, and you had better keep that one person happy.
Yeah, I can give you 3 or 4 examples of where that person went away and the firm just didn't recover.
Yeah.
They didn't realize it was so impacted because of, and that person had confidence in this firm and just said all the right things so that the sales were as easy as, it was just so easy to close because they already knew everything they should have.
And sometimes that one person is a client who just keeps changing companies and keeps bringing the firm along, right? And the firm is able to hold on to those.
Yeah.
Okay. What's number 6 on our list of 11?
It's moving away from as heavy implementation load as you have to less implementation and more strategy, which scales from a financial standpoint so much better. So you're looking at a firm that is higher or in a higher band than you might expect, and you say, what is it about that? And then you start to see, oh, they're more an advisory firm that does implementation when the client needs it, or if the client finds it handy, or if they just want one-stop shopping or whatever, but they're not hanging everything on that implementation. The implementation is just optional if you need it, but they're really an advisory firm that still calls themselves. It's kind of like we did an episode not too long ago about what kind of firm are you, right?
Yeah. I'm also remembering in your book, The Business of Expertise, you have this great visual, this diagram of 2 rooms. There's the small strategy room and there's the larger implementation room. There's a door from the outside into each room, and then there's a connecting door from those two rooms.
Right.
And your point is you want to get to this place where the only way a client can get to your implementation room is through your strategy room.
Right.
And once you make that shift and everybody's going through the strategy room, you will get to this place where you stop and ask yourself the question, should we even be doing implementation at all? And I think we agree there isn't a right answer to that question. It's a very personal one.
Right.
But you should get to that place. Great.
Yep.
Number 7, we're talking about the critical factors that affect you getting stuck at these 4 performance bands.
This 7th one is boring, but it's true, right?
There's no silver bullet. It's an effective marketing plan, which takes a lot of work.
You know that. I know that. We both have people that help us with that because it needs to be done well. Okay, I'm going to say something that maybe shocks some people, not you probably, but it's not even because the marketing plan delivers opportunity to your door. It's because if the marketing plan is designed appropriately, it's making you more confident because you're thinking about your unique point of view. And there's more to talk about. You see yourself different. There's a distance between you and your competitors that comes from the marketing plan, even if no clients come to you because of it. I just really believe in developing that point of view in many different ways, even if it doesn't deliver clients to you.
That's a great point. I don't think we've talked about that before, which is your marketing is effective, even if it's not obviously driving inbound leads.
Yeah.
It's effective because it's making you smarter. It's forcing you to think through these things to create the content that is the content of your marketing, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great benefit. And then number 8 is a tight positioning.
Yeah, how are you going to do a marketing plan unless you that's one of the worst jobs in the world is to create a marketing plan without a tight positioning. But you and I both know firms, right, who are very poorly positioned that make a lot of money. So each of these factors doesn't have to be true, but you can just see how sometimes they're making a lot of money. They're in a certain higher performance band because they have a great positioning. Other times, they don't have a great positioning, but they're very, very confident people. So it's not like all these things have to apply, but there's just no argument against this. It's just such a great thing to do, and you will see a commonality. I see a correlation between confidence and marketing plan. All of a sudden, you have an opportunity to focus on similar situations, and the ideas and the solutions come to you so much quicker because you've seen this before.
Yeah.
So that's tight positioning. Number 9, I love this one.
Sunk costs in new business development.
You call it investing in the sale. So you'll find that firms in higher performance bands do not invest in the sale in that they have no problem just walking away from an opportunity that doesn't seem like it's going to yield a good ROI. And if somebody is chasing new business opportunities and putting a lot of energy into it, chances are that they are not in a very high performance band, or they have only 4 or 5 clients and each client warrants that sort of investment.
And from the outside, that might not be obvious. It might look like a successful from the outside. They're throwing a lot of resources at these opportunities. They're winning their share. It looks like they're winning the business. That's not giving you any visibility into profit, and we're using this performance band as a surrogate for profit.
Right.
So it can be a little bit deceiving looking in from the outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have no sunk costs in a sale, then it's easier to do the right thing. When your cost of sale is lower, your odds of winning are higher. I think we've talked about that before. If not, we can talk about it in a future episode. Your cost of sale is an indicator of how likely you are to win the business. So when you have all of these sunk costs, you end up going deeper and deeper and throwing more and more things at it. You're giving up it's a bigger topic for maybe even another day. We've got to get through 2 more on our list of critical factors that affect you being stuck in a certain performance band. Number 10, you care more, and I assume you mean about the work, than the client does.
Yeah. It's like an anchor. And this is so weird to talk about because it feels kind of slimy, kind of scummy to talk about it.
You can imagine, I'm sure, as I can, some listeners recoiling at this, being personally offended.
A lot of them.
We over-deliver. It's a badge of honor that we care more than the client does.
Right. And in some ways it is. It's hard to diss somebody for caring too much. But especially when it comes to, I think you should care a whole lot in that first room stuff, the strategy, the research, the plan, whatever. But in the implementation side, that's where people lose their shirts, is when they care more on the implementation than the client does. And I would rather they try to figure out how much the client cares and then match that and not go above it, right?
Yeah, or maybe just a tiny little bit above, right? I've seen so much profit frittered away by over-delivering on things that the client wouldn't even catch. And I told this story before. I was in a client's in-house edit suite. They're working on a really big, expensive corporate film for a client. And my client was like directing some changes. Like, he showed me the film. I thought it was beautiful. Then he asked the editor to make a couple of changes. And then afterwards, as we were walking out, I said, those changes you just made, is the client going to notice? No.
Exactly right. That's exactly the illustration. But the way it normally happens is it was 3 late nights of making changes that nobody notices.
Yeah.
Not just a few quick ones.
The last thing on our list of critical factors that affects your performance band: can't bear to see their brilliant ideas messed up by the client.
So the client is fine letting the in-house department do it or working with contractors or whatever, and you have this ethical straitjacket that says, we've got to see the identity through everything. We can't just leave it in their hands. And immediately they're diving down to the lower performance band by something like that. So there's some overlap in all these things.
Yeah, I guess there's a reason it's number 11, because I could see a lot of cases where it makes sense for you to hold on to certain type of implementation or execution work. You need to make sure you're paid appropriately for it.
Mm-hmm.
But your point is the margin is in the front room.
Right.
Or should be, that strategy room.
Right.
There can be volume in the tactical implementation room, but, high volume, low margin work does not put you in one of these higher performance bands. You're not likely to get past the typical or classic band of $150,000 to $180,000 in fees on that type of business model with high volume rote tactical work, unless you've got some sort of like mechanical advantage or labor cost advantage. And it's hard to find anybody with a real labor cost advantage these days.
They're still looking for it. I'm working with a firm right now that half their staff is in Mexico at the moment. Then you still see a lot of this in parts of Western Europe and Eastern Europe as well, Latin America. Yeah.
So 11 critical factors that affect you being stuck at certain performance bands. We've just got a few minutes left here. First, let's talk about things that don't seem to matter. What things that listeners might think, well, surely it's got to be X would contribute, that you think, nope, doesn't matter?
Size of the firm is one thing.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? In fact, the smaller your firm, your fee per full-time employee equivalent is over $1 million.
Who, mine?
Yeah. Isn't it?
Yeah, probably. Maybe significantly more, possibly.
He doesn't want to be put on the spot.
I don't know who else is listening.
Let's just say it's around $1 million. You're way past exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
Don't read too much into that.
My head's getting big.
But you're one person.
Right.
You add another person to help out. All of a sudden, that's cut in half.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible to have a really small firm that's in the super high performance band. Mm-hmm. And would you also agree that the larger the firm, generally speaking, the less likely you are to be in one of the top 2 bands? Or do you think I'm...
Oh, absolutely the case, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a lot of single person clients who are in the 400, 500, 600 range.
Yeah.
Size just doesn't matter. In fact, like you're saying, it's almost an inverse relationship.
What else doesn't matter?
How long the firm's been around.
Yeah, in fact, the longer you are in a performance band, the longer, it's kind of like the Lindy effect. If an idea has been around for 50 years or a book has sold for 50 years, it's highly likely to be around for another 50 years. If you've been stuck in a band for 10 years, it's likely that you will be stuck in that band in another 10 years.
You're quite the motivational speaker today, Mr. Enns.
So just give up now, people.
Right. Number of partners, where you are, that might surprise people.
Really?
Yeah.
What about a San Francisco-based firm that has all these costs?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're kind of arguing the other side of it. So maybe you should be in Des Moines rather than San Francisco.
I had a conversation with a firm based in LA, fairly big, fairly famous firm, and I asked their AGI per FTE. This was at an event I was running years ago, and the guy told me the number, and I went, wow, you must be really profitable, because I think it was high 300s.
Yeah.
And he said, actually, we're not really. He said, we have a lot of $300,000-$400,000 people running around.
And we're not talking about the profit. So like you could manage this thing. You could be really a high thing and maybe making no money at the end because you mismanage it, right? That's another podcast episode.
We're using it as a surrogate for profit.
Yeah, right.
So geography doesn't matter. The last thing on your list of things that don't seem to affect your performance band, specific positioning choice.
You might disagree with this one, but I see good examples of people making money in high performance bands everywhere. So in other words, the obvious question is, well, could you do this if you were focused on nonprofits or associations? And I would say, yes, you can. There's probably a smaller percentage of firms that are focused there that are making it, but yeah, absolutely. I've seen great examples everywhere.
I can recall a firm specializing in not-for-profit almost 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago now. Their number was over 400,000.
Wow.
It was a small firm. It wasn't a tiny firm. I agree with you. I think you and I did this Clubhouse thing a little while ago with Christo, and when we were talking about positioning, and that's one of the things that came up is this idea that you don't have to choose exactly the right positioning.
You also said something else I thought was great. You said it doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be perfectible, your positioning decision.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a line from David Chapin. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be perfectible, which is a great one. So don't be held back by the positioning decisions. Make one, and if you've got to adjust it later, make it again.
Right.
And this idea that you've got to find the one right one, no. Just make a choice, move forward. Okay, so I think we need to put a bow around this.
Shouldn't we tell them like roughly what we see percentage-wise, and then we can leave them to their joy or their misery, depending on where they are in the band? So the first one, the lowest one, 100 to 150, the developing one, I see about 10% of the people in there. 70% are where most of them, that's in the 150 to 180, the typical classic. And then about 15% in the 180 to 220, the solid. And then just 5% at the very top. And there's usually a combination of all these things like positioning, confidence, maybe they've got a referral source, maybe one of them worked at a serious firm. So we just want to get people thinking about all this stuff.
The numbers, the range that defines the bands, these change over time because you and I started having this conversation probably 15 years ago, and the numbers were a little bit lower. What you would have said was typical classic, even 7-8 years ago, is probably lower than it is today. So
yeah,
they're going to change over time.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm stuck in a band. Let's say I'm stuck at typical classic. I've been there for 10 years. The highest we've reached in fee per FTE is $170,000. The harder we push, it's like now we're really busy. Now we need to add more people. So I can't seem to get above this threshold. Where do I start?
Therapist. I've got 3 ex-therapists. You could just work with one of them. Have you ever been to a therapist?
Well, you're kind of my therapist. I just don't pay you. I just don't want to pay a therapist.
I do not want that response. You're not on my client list.
I go to a therapist every 2 weeks, and we record it, and we turn it into a podcast.
I think getting out of your own way, I mean it seriously. I don't mean necessarily it has to be a therapist, but have some candid conversation.
Are you talking about confidence specifically? It's like the issue is your confidence. Do what you can, knowing there's only so much you can do. How often do you see people moving the confidence needle?
I think I've got a selection bias here because of how I work with people, right? The people who come to me want to move to the next band. And they'll usually, within 6 to 12 months, they'll move up one band. But then they kind of get stuck there for another 5 years.
So you start with working on your own confidence however you can, especially if you really feel that's an issue.
Right.
And then the second suggestion is position. Work on your positioning so that what?
So many other things can happen so that you get more confident, so that you have a lead generation plan that you can build, so that you have more opportunity that you feel like you can waste every once in a while. It's just like all these things. We could go on and on and on. But positioning is how can you do this without positioning? If there's anything anybody listening to this thing is tired of hearing us say over and over again in every episode, is positioning, right? So that's got to start.
Yeah, and you talk about the benefits of pattern matching, right? So when you're positioned broadly, you solve all kinds of different problems for all kinds of different people. You do not benefit from pattern matching. As soon as you start to narrow your field of vision and look at the similar set of problems, you see the patterns, you feel smarter, you feel more confident. Mm-hmm. So positioning does drive confidence.
Yeah.
And it also drives leads, right? That helps. And lead gen, that's the third, creates deal flow, which leads to options, which is the other thing that affects your confidence.
Yeah, it's like getting invited to the dance. If you never get invited, it just impacts but every conversation you have with a prospect is like getting invited to the dance. It's like somebody notices, somebody cares, somebody wants to work together. It's just, and I can't do a lead gen plan unless I have a positioning. So that's a big one, lead gen.
Yeah. And then the last one on the list of where to start.
It's where you spend your entire life. Well, actually, you do a lot of positioning as well, but also pricing, right?
Pricing to maximize the opportunity. Such a high ROI topic. And, I used to think, before I even studied anything about pricing, let alone started teaching it, I thought, yeah, I know pricing. How complicated can it be? Mm-hmm. It's a big, deep, complex subject.
There are probably huge areas that you haven't even explored as much as you know about pricing, and you're kind of excited about being able to sit down for 3 months and thinking about it. It's like an endless topic. There's so many things to learn and experiment with. It's been fun to kind of watch it from the side for me.
And I think I just got permission from you to take 3 months off. Thank you. Let's end on that note. We're talking about performance bands. What are they, and why do you get stuck in certain bands, and how do you break free? Good luck getting to the next level. We'll see you there.
Thanks, Blair.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.